they just didn't understand it at all in terms of the boys. I think the big misconceptions come from the male population. Why don't you just play basketball? You can't dribble, you can't dunk. Where's the backboard?
I need that backboard to judge my shot. And when you don't have a backboard, it just makes it so much harder because then you're just aiming for the rim.
Do you get the ball? Do you have to stop and pivot? Then you see that only 2 players can leave this third and only 1 player can do this.
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't confused at least a couple of times on some of the ball movement.
That pathway in terms of the youth structure is very, very good. Or it is mainly played in the Commonwealth countries. The top 4 teams that you'll usually hear are England, Jamaica, New Zealand and Australia. It's starting to see some emergence in the States. So hopefully at some point it will be an Olympic sport. It is common for people to have 2 jobs. So to be a netballer and to have a profession on the side.
How did the tournament go?
Oh, we didn't win. Yeah, it was really bad. I was hoping you weren't going to ask me about that. Yeah, we didn't win. We weren't in the top 5. It was terrible, but it was a really good weekend.
Hey everyone, welcome back to an all new episode of All About Sports, the podcast, a sports podcast weekly for the fans and by the fans. Joining me today is Rishabh Krishnan and I'm Mazhar, and we have a very, very special guest. But before we get into the introduction of our dear guest, I just wanted to talk about what we covered last week. So Krishnan and I discussed Klay Thompson's return to the NBA and what has transpired from the time he was out with injury and up until now. So do check that episode out, all basketball fans. Also, just an update on some of the things that have happened just now as we are recording this episode. Rafael Nadal is officially the leading Grand Slam record holder with 21 Grand Slams, winning the Australian Open in grand fashion against Daniil Medvedev. And secondly, on the flip side of things, shocking news has broken out on Mason Greenwood apparently harassing and beating his longtime girlfriend, and reports to follow. And I'm sure we will talk about that in the future when we get more official news about that. Now, coming to the meat of the discussion for today, I wanted to introduce my dear friend, who is also one of my classmates, Olivia Eastwood. Pleasure to have you, Olivia.
Thank you.
And just to give you all a brief introduction about Olivia, she was a netball player at a young age. She started playing when she was just 11 years old in school. Then she got scouted to play outside of London. She's London born and bred, by the way. And then she moved on at 14 and 15 when she went for trials. And then she made a semi-pro youth team. And she stayed there till the under-19s level. And during this time, she also got a call up for the under-19s England development squad, which speaks volumes of how much she's achieved as a youngster. Then when she joined university, she played in the first team for 3 years and ended up winning 2 BUCS championships, which is the British Universities and College Sports tournament. And she's also working in sports. So pretty inspiring for all those people who are trying to get into the sports industry. She works for this company known as BADU Sports. She's the brand and project manager out there. She closely works with partners and manages key projects that she implements within their communities at BADU. She basically focuses on strategy, partnerships, brand image, and media content. And just a bit of background as to what BADU Sports does. They're a community-based organization that focuses on providing opportunities to young people through the use of sports. So thank you for joining us, Liv. It's a pleasure to have you. And it's nice to have a discussion on the other side, outside of class, and to see you here. And mind you, she is also a Loughborough University London student. And for those of you who don't know, Loughborough is the leading sports university, probably in the world, arguable, of course. But officially, as per the rankings, it is the #1 university. So Liv, you're living the dream.
I know.
And how are you doing today? And good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here, and all is well. I'm excited to have a good discussion with you guys. So thank you for having me.
So before we get into the episode, just to tell you, since Olivia has experienced so much in her life through netball, we will be talking about netball as the focus. It's another sport that we haven't covered before. And like we said, we always try to cover all the sports possible and bring something new to our audience. So Krishna, take it away.
Thanks so much, Maz, and thank you, Olivia. I'll be completely honest. I had to do a quick recap of netball. I kind of watched a bunch online. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't confused at least a couple of times on some of the ball movement, but I'm sure we'll get into it. But Olivia, you spoke about you're based in the UK. You're from London. For our viewers who maybe have less exposure to netball, what are some of the countries that are kind of where netball is more popular, or maybe even within the UK? Are there parts of the UK where it's more, it's practiced more, it's played more, that you can kind of share?
Yeah, no, so netball is a Commonwealth sport. So I don't know if you know, but it's not an Olympic sport. So it's not in the Olympics. It hasn't featured in the Olympics. And that's something of a big talking point. And I suppose a big factor of it not being an Olympic sport is America doesn't play it. So, a bit of a misconception, if America doesn't play it, we're not playing it. But again, it's starting to see some emergence in the States. So hopefully at some point it will be an Olympic sport. So yeah, it is mainly played in the Commonwealth countries. So you'll hear the big names in terms of the top four teams that you'll usually hear are England, Jamaica, New Zealand, and Australia. But that's not excluding the other Commonwealth countries. But those are your big kind of four sports. So if you ever see a quad series or a tri series, those four teams or three teams will tend to be in the mix for those. So yeah, those are the main ones. But again, it's a great sport, and I think in terms of the UK, it's very prevalent in terms of how many girls are playing it. It's a school sport that you'll see very commonly in lots of schools in the UK. I suppose, again, I know it might lead on to a further conversation we have in this chat, but sometimes it's not really focused as your inner city sport. You'll see it and hear about it more outside of your bigger cities, more in rural areas. But again, that comes from the structure of how the game was set up and started to become popular in the country.
That makes a lot of sense, Olivia. And kind of going off that, so can you share a little bit of guidance on how the sport is maybe structured at the professional level? So it sounds like maybe it's sort of nationally structured. Mm-hmm. And so do professional players, I guess, are all the professional players who are playing at that level, are they full-time just professional netball players? Are there anything else they're doing additionally from a financial perspective to supplement their careers? What does sort of a professional career in netball maybe look like, at the top level?
Yeah, and I think this is a big kind of talking point here, because it's a very new thing in the grand scheme of the sport. So if we go back to when I started playing at 11, that was 12 years ago now. So there's a very good youth structure. So similar to like cricket and other sports that kind of follow the county, regional, national kind of pathway setup, it's got a very good structure. So you'll start quite small scale in your region or whatever, or county, and then you'll branch out and keep branching. So they have a very good pathway for that kind of progression into the sport. And then when you get to the kind of Super League level, so which I like to describe as the equivalent of the Premier League. So the Netball Super League is what you would say is the Premier League for football. That again is where you kind of get the full-time contracts that come in. And again, this is something that I'm fairly new to, because I didn't train and play at Super League level. So this is something that I've heard through friends that I still have playing, and I've done my own bit of research. But yeah, commonly it is common for people to have two jobs. So to be a netballer and to have a profession on the side, because unlike the Premier League, they don't pay just to play netball. And again, there's some exceptions to that. You have import players that might actually have to be paid full-time in order to play. But then again, there's some anomalies, I guess you could say, for their visas as well. For import players, some of them have to study to then be on the right visa to play full-time. So because of the newness in the structure of the sport, there's a bit of a shift. There are a few full-time players, and it's becoming more common. But again, it's this really new talking point and turning point for the sport, because it just wasn't a thing. And even when I was playing, I know I didn't get to those higher levels. The thought of becoming a pro or getting to that really high level was I still had to consider, what I was going to do with my degree and what was I going to work in. I didn't just have this athlete focus. And I don't know if that's just me, but there was that kind of culture in the sport where you had to think more than just the sport. But I suppose on the flip side, if we take it out of the UK and we look at your Australias and your New Zealands, they have the infrastructure, the sport has enough following, they have a good kind of media presence and monetary presence in order for them to kind of be full-time athletes. And I think the UK in terms of netball are a little bit behind that. But again, Australia and New Zealand have a good model for what it could look like.
Do they have a similar like Super League equivalent in Australia and
Yeah.
New Zealand? Gotcha. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's massive out there. It's really huge.
So, Liv, what is the typical age? You've spoken so much about how it's the professional transition is hard, but
Mhm.
what is the typical age when netball players reach their peaks, potentially in England or globally,
Yeah.
as you may know? And is there like a point when they start to decline and when they get that reality check that, okay, now I can't pursue this full time, I need to do something else? When is that reality point?
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing about what I will say and what I'll discuss now is that I actually don't think there is a peak with this sport. And I don't know if I'm just saying that from like my impression of it and what I've seen, but there is a really good structure at both ends of the scale. So at the older athlete end and the younger athlete, I think majority of athletes I would define as quite young in terms of that, because of the pathway. If I link it back to what we said, that pathway in terms of the youth structure is very, very good. So I know players that I went to uni with and that I went to club with, for example, who are now in the England squad and are 22, 21. And again, because of that really kind of quick succession of youth into teams and, that structure that keeps flipping over. So I would say there is a predominantly young background of player in there. I wouldn't say they've peaked because they're so young, but we're seeing a lot of new, fresh legs, fresh faces on the courts to give them that exposure. But then on the other side of it, I know players that from both abroad and the UK, that have gone through, like had children, for example, had children and have returned to the elite stage in terms of they're playing for their country or playing in the Super League. So again, it's really hard to kind of define that peak because I think the youth structure is so good in developing the athlete that it's harder to lose. And again, when we look at the sport of netball, it's a very team game. You can't win without the team. It's not like basketball where you have 5 players on the court or 5 in your team and one can do all the running and the dunking while the others are just there. You need every member of the team to get the ball involved. And I think because of that, I'm not saying that takes the strain off the body or anything, but there's less of a a focus on one individual player. So maybe that has something to do with why they can play for longer, for example. But yeah, I wouldn't say there's a traditional peaking age, but I think that kind of 20 to 30 bracket is a good little sweet spot for netball players.
No, that's completely fair. And I think we were watching a couple of clips and there are only specific there's only like one position that can score, right? At the end, there's only two positions. Got it. Okay, yeah. Sorry, 2 positions that can score at the end. So yeah. There is a lot of interesting ball movement that is really, really unique, I think, to netball specifically.
Honestly.
And I was going to say, wait, I don't know if we asked this, Olivia, what position did you play out of curiosity?
Yeah, so I played both ends. I was defensive and offensive. So I played goalkeeper and goal shooter. I know Maz can tell you this, I'm very tall. So it kind of worked in my favor that I was in the kind of offensive and defensive ends because, I was definitely needed for my height down there.
Got it. Completely makes sense, Olivia. And Olivia, you spoke a little bit about how, in the UK especially, it's pretty well ingrained into maybe the school and the college systems. Maybe at the professional levels, it sort of isn't as well developed as, say, maybe in Australia or in New Zealand. Is there any, we talk a lot about here in the US, the transition from, let's say, NCAA to professional sports. Is there some guidance you can share on the number of players who are, let's say, playing at the university level? What percentage of those players is it feasible to maybe go into, into the professional level? So what's sort of the transition, the conversion rate almost from players playing at the university or college level to, becoming professionals?
Again, I think it's hard to pinpoint those specific numbers because of the sport and the structure and everything. But I would say it's a very large percentage. Off the top of my head, if I was going to think just about my journey and how I've been involved with the sport, I could easily say, I'm talking about plus 70%, over that mark. I would say, because if I'm looking at my own university team, for example, when I was there, I think the majority, so there's 14 players on a squad, for example, I would say at least 8 to 12 of those would have been in some form of higher netball structure. So be it, and again, this was all very different. It could be the Super League, which I was saying to you before, with the Premier League equivalent. And then there's like I don't want to call, they're not social leagues, they're structured leagues. So it'd be like Prem League One, for example. So it's not in the Super League, but it's the league underneath. And there'd be those kind of leagues, which are still really high level, but they're just on the cusp of that Super League level. So a lot of the team would still be in that structure, even if they weren't playing at Super League or so on and so forth. But again, attached to those Super League teams, there are youth teams attached. So the way you would have, Man City at the top, and then you'd have Man City Youth, and then all of their under-19s. So again, a lot of the girls would be involved in those youth teams attached to the Super League, for example. So there's lots of different entry points to playing a high-level game of netball. And I think because of that, that translates into the university setting where a lot of players can still get high-level sport and then get, an education attached to it. And then when I was at uni, I was on a netball program. So I played for my university and it was a high level netball program. And that's when we got into the British universities and colleges, competition. That was because of that. So there's still a lot of elite level netball going on, even if you're not necessarily in one of those structures. And I think because of that, we're seeing a lot of young players coming through a lot quicker. Because the access to the sport and to the sport at a high level is really kind of quick. So yeah, I hope that answers that one.
No, that's actually really helpful because that's a lot higher than you would maybe assume, especially comparing to some of the other sports, the conversion rate from, let's say college or university to one of the professional leagues that might exist. So that's really interesting to know. And that leads in well into the other question, which is, again, a lot of people may not have as much exposure to netball. What are some of the common misconceptions that you've heard from people about netball?
I think the biggest one I had, so my school, my secondary school, they just didn't understand it at all in terms of the boys. I think the big misconception come from the male population in terms of like, why don't you just play basketball? You can't dribble, you can't dunk, where's the backboard? And all of these things start to come out. And I completely get it at some points. To the first eye and to the first impression you have of the sport is completely weird. Why do you get the ball? Do you have to stop and pivot? Why can't you run with it? Why can't you dribble? And then when you see so many players on the court and then you see that everyone has a chance of getting the ball, and then you see that only 2 players can leave this third and only 1 player can do this, all of these questions start to come up. So I think that was a big misconception of just in terms of actually understanding what the sport is, how you win. And, I think it is quite flashy and flamboyant, but when you compare it to basketball, where you can't, like netball, you can't dunk, you can't be a show off kind of thing. It loses that element of flamboyance, which people are like, oh, I don't really understand. So I think that's a bit of like, what's going on here? And I think another one is the elitist nature of the sport. And I don't know if this is a misconception as such, but it's definitely something that is associated with netball. So as I said, I'm like London through and through, but it's not necessarily an inner city sport. And the reason I say this is because, again, even when I started playing, I associated netball with private schools, well-to-do people, your countryside kind of social leagues that were really nice, but like out in the sticks, you had to drive really far to get there. So I think that, again, is a misconception, but even still, there is some truth in that, because some of the history of netball, it is kind of stemming from those countryside towns, where it's, again, not that inner city vibe. And similarly with the kind of private school connotation that comes with it, there has been moments in the sport where, there is a lack of diversity, there is a lack of representation, less so in the national structure. But as you come up the ranks, when you move from your county to the region, for example, and like little things like that, you'll start to see the disparities. So I suppose there's a mixture of disparity and misconception within that. But I'd say those are probably the main two in terms of, comparing it to another sport, which would be basketball. And again, the misconception of who actually plays and where do people actually play it.
That completely makes sense. And also it definitely, you ran through all the questions I had as I was kind of watching more. You ran through all the questions that were running through my head as I was sort of watching that clip. So embarrassingly, you hit the nail on the head in terms of all the questions people maybe have when watching the sport.
Yeah, when I've watched netball and I see the scoring that happens, I'm like, I can't picture that, because for me, shooting I need that backboard to judge my shot. And when you don't have a backboard, it just makes it so much harder because then you're just aiming for the rim.
Exactly.
It's definitely, there's a lot of skill involved and credit where it's
100%.
due. And people, I think, discount that as well. And that's a massive misconception where they're like, oh, why not play basketball? Like you said, Liv. I've heard that as well from people. They were like, oh, why would people watch netball? And I'm like, because there's so much skill involved in that game as well. You just don't want to see it because, like you said, flamboyance, I guess, comes down to that. Liv, moving on, we're going to move away from netball and let's talk about you now.
Okay.
So I've always been wondering this. How are you managing your full-time role of working along with a full-time master's program? And what do you plan on doing next, Liv? Because honestly, you amaze me and I'm inspired by you, truly.
Oh, thank you. No, I appreciate that. And I think it's a weird one. I work for a company that, are very understanding of like my commitment and my personal growth and my professional growth. So I suppose, for me to go in and be able to say to my boss, listen, I want to go and do a master's, but I still would like to work. How can we do this? I suppose it's credit to them. And I think, again, when I say I'm managing it, it's really tough because when I'm not at uni, I'm at work. And when I'm not at work, I'm at uni. And it is difficult because, like, as Maz will know, we're still young and like we talk a lot about this on the course about doing things. And it's hard in that respect because, at 23, turning 24, I still want to be very sociable. And I am a very sociable character. And I think that is where the trickiness lies. I have to be very focused so I can get all my assignments done. I have to be very focused to get all my work done, but I still want to be able to have fun. But I suppose in terms of that management, it comes from knowing that this is the right time, if that makes sense. So I did my undergrad in psychology. I graduated in 2019. I took 2 years out. So I've been working for BADU Sports for 2 years at that point. And then I started this degree in October of 21, was it? Yeah, 2021. So I think as well, I was already managing my workload. So I got into that pattern of, I know how to work. So when the masters came in, I just had to fit it alongside what I was already doing. So I suppose that has kind of helped. I didn't rush into masters straight after my undergrad, for example. So getting a bit more industry insight and a bit more like actual experience into the working world was really beneficial. And I did have to weigh it up. I did think at the beginning, I'm going to have to quit my job, and actually focus on this full time. But at the moment, everything is okay. And in terms of the second part of your question, what is next? I don't know. I think the big thing with uni, and again, Maz, you can vouch for this, is there's so much to learn. And I've loved the course up until this point because every module there's been something new. Like the sports sponsorship module we had, for example, I didn't know that was all of the workings and processes. And as someone that works for a company that does some of the sports sponsorship stuff, I was like, where have I been? What have I been missing? So in that respect, I don't know what comes next because it's so nice to learn so many new things. But I think what I would say is I would like something quite commercial next. I work for a community company, a community-based company and organization. And I live and breathe where I work because the community we serve is where I live, for example. So I would like to see what life is like on the more corporate side of sport, and chase the competition and chase the money a little bit. I don't know, but I think that is something I'm quite interested in.
Yeah, what I can say for sure is, Liv, whatever you set out to achieve, you will achieve. So keep going for it.
Thank you.
Secondly, just to wrap up with the set of questions before we move on to the fun part of the segment, it's a bit on the lighter note again.
Yeah.
This is a bit tricky for you. So who are you supporting for the Netball Super League? Because there is a slight conflict now, right? Because Loughborough Lightning, and then you've got London as well.
Yeah.
So like, where are your loyalties lying right now?
Do you know what it is? It's really tricky because I know so many different people in different teams as well. So I have to think about, that was that one friend I had at uni that's now playing up in Scotland. Do I really love her? Do I want to support her? Or do I then go, I've got a friend in the London team who I'm really like close to and I haven't seen her in years. And because London Pulse play where I work and where we study, I've bumped into her recently, so I've got my old friend back as well. So I suppose I'm going to give the answer that's true to my heart. I'm going to say London Pulse. I'm really keen to get them in. I'm going to say it because I know a lot of people in the Pulse network and the Pulse team. So yeah, I'm going to be repping them quite hard this season and tipping them to win. But of course, I'm going to give a little special shout out to Loughborough because, you know, we're students there. We have to respect them. But yeah, London Pulse all the way. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, for me, it's simple. Loughborough are the champions currently. So let's go.
Yeah, but we need some new competition, Maz. We need to knock them off the top, shake it up a bit.
Yeah. I mean, after coming here, West Ham seems the way to go anyway. So I'll tell you which team I'm supporting halfway through the season.
Smart move.
This was helpful. So now at least I know what team to root for. If I ever get into a conversation with someone, I know exactly what team to say. At least I can vaguely talk to it. So this is really helpful. So like Maz was saying, Olivia, the next segment, we try to keep it pretty light. It's just quick fire questions and answers. They're usually pretty lighthearted. It's a little bit about, you know, a little bit about sport, a little bit about personal, just a mixed bag, but just quick answers, whatever comes to mind right off the bat. So okay. I'll get started. You've obviously played netball for some time. What is your favorite netball memory and your favorite netball travel experience?
I say I had a tournament up in Newcastle with one of the teams I played with outside of school. And it was the first big tournament I ever had. And I didn't know how competitive I was until I went on this tournament. I was like diehard netball player. I was like, I need to win. I have to win. And all my family came to watch. And yeah, it was a great time. Really good.
How did you end up? Where did y'all end up finishing? How did the tournament go?
Oh, we didn't win. Yeah, it was really bad. I was hoping you weren't going to ask me about that. Yeah, we didn't win. We weren't in the top 5. It was terrible, but it was a really good weekend.
No, I should have taken the cue when you didn't mention where you finished. That was my bad. That was my fault. Not my strongest suit. But Olivia, no, that's good to know. Next question. Maz actually told me you're pretty into music. What is the song right now that you have on repeat?
Oh, I can't remember the name of it. There's a film I watched on Netflix. I'm quick and trying to check my Spotify. I watched it. It's called The Lost Daughter, and I really like the song on there. It's called Beautiful. Yeah, it was really good song.
Nice. Okay, I gotta check this out. The Lost Daughter.
Yeah, okay. On Netflix. Honestly, great film. I'd recommend.
So, Liv, your favorite sport outside of netball? I know the answer to this, but just for our viewers as well.
Oh, I'm curious to think what you think the answer is. Outside, I'm probably gonna have to go basketball. You know, I think it's one of those things. I define myself as quite sport agnostic. Like I like to watch sport in general. I don't necessarily gravitate to one thing or the other. Like I can be watching the NFL, the NBA, and the next thing you know, some cricket. Like I genuinely just like to watch sport. But if I had to pick, yeah, I'd pick basketball.
Yeah, I knew that because I think we had a discussion around this.
Yes, we did actually. Yeah, you might have forgot about that. Yeah, we did.
So, Olivia, who has been your idol growing up? Whether it's sports or not, doesn't matter.
I would have to say probably like my parents and my dad in particular. I think they've both been really good in terms of just pushing me and my sister into different avenues and being quite supportive. I suppose the sporty side comes from my dad, and when I was growing up, he used to play football really like every weekend and was a goalkeeper. So again, like I was quite exposed to sport from a young age. And that was always really nice to be around him and his teammates and the culture around it. So yeah, I'd say my parents have been really good in supporting our sporting decisions.
Olivia, this wasn't part of it, but now that we know you're an NBA fan, is there a team you root for?
Again, this is a tricky one because I like a lot of teams. I'm a really bad fan because I'm like, oh, I love everyone. So I love the Milwaukee Bucks, big Giannis fan. And then again, I love the Celtics. Yeah, I'm going to stick with Milwaukee just to be on the safe side. But again, I can love every team. And obviously the Lakers, I think they have a place in everyone's heart. But yeah, then I'm going to say about the Bulls as well. I literally love every team. But I'm going to stick with Giannis just to be safe. So Milwaukee.
That's perfect, Olivia, because you've picked between the two of us, you've picked generally the teams that we root for. Barring the Celtics, you generally picked the Mazza's a Lakers fan, he loves Giannis. I'm based in Chicago, so by default, a Bulls fan. So you picked all the perfect answers to at least make sure that this segment stays on for the editor, because at least both of us editing it love those teams. So then, Olivia, your favorite and least favorite food?
Ooh. Okay, favorite food. This is so tough. I'm gonna go with Italian food. So just general Italian food. And then least favorite. Okay, I couldn't name a cuisine, for example, but anything that's too like mushroom heavy. I'm not a fan of mushrooms. So yeah, anything that's got that in it. No, thank you.
Oh no, I'm a huge fan of mushrooms, but completely fair, completely reasonable. I've heard this a lot recently, actually, with mushrooms. So completely fair. Okay, Mazhar also told me that you actually made a trip down to India at some point. I think you went to Jaipur, I think is what he mentioned. What was the favorite part of your trip to India?
Oh my God, I loved it also. It was me and my dad that went. And yeah, we did everything. But my favorite part, I went to Amritsar, and it's been on my list since I don't even know how old I was. I had a conversation with Maz about Bollywood films. I've got a sweet spot for Bollywood films. Absolutely love it. And Aishwarya Rai, one of my favorite actresses ever. And so she was in a British Bollywood film, Pride and Prejudice, and I loved it. One of my favorite films. And the opening scene is the Golden Temple just at the front. And I was like, I have to go. And so when we went, I think it was like day 5 or day 6, we went to Amritsar, and I had the moment where I walked through and I saw the Golden Temple. And yeah, that was one of the best moments of my life. It was fantastic.
It is awesome when you can be at the spot where you remember a movie scene. Yeah. That's always awesome. I was going to say, I've not been to Amritsar, so I got to put this up. Yeah. No, we have to add this to our list of places.
I beat you to it.
Yeah, I know. So Olivia, then last one. Any quote that has inspired you, a quote that inspired you, inspires you, that comes to mind?
I don't know if it necessarily inspires me, but it was something, and I think it's quite a common one. My school always said it to us, and it was talent beats hard work when hard work, I can't even remember it now, but everyone knows it. And it's always been in the back of my mind. I'm like, my school ingrained it into us, and it's really bad that I've forgotten how to say it, but it's, it's that quote, and I've seen it on Twitter, I've seen it on Instagram, it's everywhere. So please insert or remind me of the quote if you do know it. But that one, and I think not necessarily a quote, but just that kind of phrase of try your best is something that I've always stuck by. Because if you put your best in, you get your best out. So yeah, those are the kind of ones that stick with me if I'm to say anything off the top of my head.
So the quote goes, it's hard work beats talent when talent fails to work hard. I think
that's it. Thanks, man. Saved me there.
I was going to say, I actually didn't know that one. I was desperately Googling it while you were saying it. But
I'm sorry, my delivery was really bad.
No, we got it. We figured you out.
No, I remember this quote because it's always associated with batsmen from Mumbai who made it to the Indian cricket team. It's a general quote that we have for them.
I never knew that.
Because, yeah. It's not a thing, but like, it's always been brought up with, like, if you look at all our batsmen, Sachin Tendulkar, Rohit Sharma, Shreyas Iyer, it's been Ajinkya Rahane. All the Mumbai batsmen have been linked with this quote continuously because they're expected to be the most talented. They've been given so many chances. And then there was always this quote drawn out saying that, what the hell, what's going on? Give someone else a chance now. So, yeah.
Okay, I got a new tattoo idea maybe. I don't have any tattoos, but for hypothetically at some point in life. Anyhow, Olivia, thank you so much. This is really, really entertaining. It was very educational for us as well, very honestly. So thank you so much for your time. For those listening, we'll share all of Olivia's details in the description. So make sure to check out what Olivia is doing and learn more about her story. But with that, thanks so much for listening. This week, we'll have a fresh new episode for you next week. So stay safe, have a great week, and we'll catch you next week. Thank you. If you like this episode, make sure to leave a like and share it with anyone else who might be interested. You can also subscribe on any social media platform that you prefer, and all our links are in the bio. We also have a website with all our episodes as well as blogs and a whole lot of other sports content, so make sure to check that out as well.